And one of the things that we always do when we begin our service is to begin with an opening treatment. So I invite you all to join me now as I take this conscious breath, and I invite you to understand that the vehicle of the breath is so powerful, especially if you can close your eyes and take the visual cues that are around you, just not see them. Focus on that breath going in and going out. And if you do it slowly, and 3 times is just a magic number, you breathe in and you exhale 3 times. And if you slow it down, just keep it slow, it actually can slow the pace of your thinking. And it allows you to breathe more deeply and allows you to relax into this moment. Because in this moment, this quiet moment, that is our seat of power. It is the place where we can truly know that there is only one mind, one heart, one idea that is going on. And it's going on through me all the time. And so in this moment, I'm allowing myself to harness that power, to feel that breath moving through my circulatory system and bringing the power of spirit to every cell in my body. That is the power that is within me, the power of the one. And I can know that whatever's going on in the world, in the beyond, whatever has happened yesterday, whatever may happen later, right now, I can just leave it in the past or in the future and stay in this moment and feel the peace that God is. Spirit, wisdom, understanding. It is the divine, and it is within me. And I express it just in that way as I allow it to express within me. So in this moment, I simply put on that mind that allows me to hear the good that is for me, to love because I am so loved in a divine way, and for me to simply be open and receptive and to smile. And so in this space, I know that I am speaking words that are true. And so as I release this word into the creative process, the mind of God, I know that it is heard. I know that it is responded to in a way that is uniquely mine for me. That is my faith. So in faith, I let that word go. And I am so grateful to know that wherever I am, God is. And where God is, all is well. I am at peace, and I can affirm as I say, amen, and so it is. So thank you all again for being here. I have been thinking about the ideas that I was going to talk about today. And do you know, I follow one of the rules that I've always wanted to follow about what you talk about. And that is essentially what is on my own mind, what things are going through my thinking and how I'm thinking about them. And if I have a title for this, it is Descriptions of Evil or a Foolish Virgin. That line comes from, and it's a delicious line, it's a sentence from Emma Curtis Hopkins, and I read that in a book. In fact, it's in this particular book. It's called Resume, and it's one of Emma Curtis Hopkins' many, many books. And I have spent time with her, and I certainly wouldn't call myself an expert, but I've spent enough time with her to understand that she pretty much teaches the same types of things over and over again. She's a metaphysical teacher. And she is a product of the 19th century and was born around the mid-19th century and moved into the time when metaphysical thought was being birthed. And she moved forward in time in a way that she was a captivating woman by the last year of her life. And Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of religious science, science of mind, was her last student. She had had many, many students. She's often called the teacher of teachers, but Ernest Holmes was her last student. And she taught him the same lessons that are in all of her books. And it's not recorded exactly what she said. He was changed by having been around her. But mostly what he got from her is this aura of mysticism that by that point in her life she completely embodied. She was so absolute in what she said that she believed in the lifted mind and the idea that we can lift ourselves up, and that when you walk through a room in that lifted up state, that people are healed simply because your mind is in that place. Rise up, my soul, and heal the sick wherever I walk. She said that. So going back to her lesson and what I read, lesson 1 is simply a matter of, it's very much like the first chapter of the Science of Mind textbook. It's about God's Spirit, the divine, the one thing. And she wants you in lesson 1 to immerse yourself in the idea of this power and this presence. Because if there is a theme to all of what she teaches, it is oneness. It's a matter of coming back to oneness and understanding whatever else is going on in the world, there really is only the one thing. So when God had creation, that was the second thing that happened. The first thing is God is. There is only God. It's spirit, it's love, it's divine. It's all of the absolutes. And then there is creation. And metaphysical ideas have come along to simply expound on the way in which we interact with the divine. And the let there be light, as Moses said, is really an act of creation. And as soon as we have creation, then that means the idea that is God is taking form. And so in chapter 2, which is where I'm talking about today, and it's chapter 2, it's lesson 2, and she discusses this in every book that she's written in this way. But she does it in different ways, but it's the same idea. And metaphysical laws and how they work are not unlike mathematical laws. For example, you have learned the multiplication tables. In the earlier years before that, you learned adding and subtracting. Well, if you've really paid attention to adding and subtracting and what it means in that intellectual sense, then when you see multiplication tables, you may go, oh, this is just a shortcut to adding. Instead of adding all of these lists long of numbers, I can use multiplying to get there faster. And so that is, metaphysical laws are like that. You may have to think about it, you may have to work with it, but the truths are still self-evident. And so in this idea that once we become part of creation, and there is creation, that idea that my good is here and I'm supposed to have it, which is the lesson that we have learned in lesson 1, all of a sudden we start thinking of reasons why we can't have it. There is good for me and I'm supposed to have it. Many people say those words from Emma Curtis Hopkins when we talk about what the good is and how we can have it. But what often happens right away, she says, is that we start thinking of ways, but I can't have that. And I can have this, but I can't have that. She calls it the conviction of absence. Like, I don't really have all of that good. And people tend to think about what they don't have. We think about what we don't have. I do. I will think about something that I want that I don't have. I will think about any number of things. And I believe that I'm just one of many who does that. And that is what Emma talked about. There's really only one thing. There's no absence of anything. There really is only one thing. There is good for me, and I'm supposed to have it. So then the question becomes, why don't I have it? And it's our thinking. Because when we start thinking of things that don't serve us, that I don't have, then we are putting feeling behind what we don't have at times. And that atmosphere of thought and feeling builds up this energy, and that's what we're teaching ourselves. And Ernest Holmes absolutely said, what you put your mind on is what you experience in the world. So if you put your mind on what you don't have, then what you are bringing into your life are things that you don't want. And Emma says that in that second lesson, and she calls it the conviction of absence. I'm focusing on what I don't have. And she says, I tell you that all that stands between you and your good, which belongs to you and which you ought to have, is your own idea of the absence of good. And sometimes we express this by saying things like, oh, I'm so blessed because I have this, without accepting the fact that I can have more than this. I'm putting a lid on what I have. And she never wants to see that happen. Any belief that I have that I can't have is that thing that is keeping my good for me. There is good for me, and I am supposed to have it. The good is omnipresent, she said. God is our good. Spirit is our good, and it's free. She also says that there is no delay in your good coming to you. I say there is no delay in the way God gives my good to me. So, there is no absence of anything that I need. And so, getting ourselves out of the habit of focusing on what we don't want, what we don't have, what we can't have, is partly what she's talking about. That habit of focusing. And again, we're not talking about with every thought we think. We're talking most of the time. And many of our spiritual teachers, including Tolle, says to us that this is hard to believe, but he says that 80 to 90% of us are unconscious, focusing on the wrong things 80 to 90% of the time. That's a lot. That is a lot. So if that's what we're thinking of, things we don't want, rehashing stories in our head that happened that we didn't like or that felt like punishment or the way someone mistreated us or whatever we do that we churn in our heads, focusing on that doesn't bring us the good that we're supposed to have. It brings us more of what we don't have and what we don't want. And so that is what she's saying. My good is there for me, and I'm supposed to have it, and that is what I know and what I keep knowing. So the other things that we sometimes think about are the more about limitations and how we let ourselves know that just because I can't see it, just because I don't understand it, it doesn't mean that I can't have it. There aren't limitations in what I can want for myself. Why? we hear about limitations all the time. You can't do this, you can't do that. And how do we move ourselves beyond what we can and can't have? When we focus on what we can have and what we do want and keep our mind in that affirmative way of being. And so she moves us forward that way. And she also encourages us to not be silent in the face of what is our good, what is the good, to speak it, to say it, as much to ourselves as to everyone else. Don't withhold from yourself. Give to yourself. And as you give to yourself, it makes it easier to give to others. And that whole cycle of giving, both of emotion and of ideas and of giving and of being, that is what contributes to our own being and, well, our happiness. The interesting thing about today is we were doing the Raymond Charles Barker reading in a little over an hour ago, and Raymond Charles Barker was talking very much about the same thing, which I just thought was a delightful thing for me, because it put this idea of things, because he's saying you can decide to be happy, and you make a very focused decision on how to be happy, and you affirm that, and you don't argue with yourself. And he goes on to say that it isn't always easy to say that, but you can plant the seed and you can focus on things that do make you happy. And the more that you're successful, you set up that atmosphere that both Ernest Holmes talks about, Raymond Charles Barker talks about, and Emma talks about, that atmosphere in your own thinking that is creative, that is life-inducing, that is there for you to discover new ways to not only be happy, but to have that good that you are seeking. My good is here for me, and I'm supposed to have it. And so, when do we do things? She also says that believing in things, she calls it believing in evil. And in Emma Curtis Hopkins, evil is a word that doesn't resonate well with most of us Americans at this point, because we have an idea about evil. What she really means are obstacles. So I tend to use the word obstacles because that's what she means. She means anything that stands between you and your good is an obstacle, and she calls it evil, but it's an obstacle. It gets in your way, and it's your thinking. It may be that you put a person in your way, and no one is truly in your way. It is mostly in your own thinking. It is your thinking that is in your way. And so she will say, there are no obstacles in my pathway. And she invites you to use that when you feel that something is in your way, because God has already given us everything. Now, the infinite and everything seems to me more than we can imagine. There is good for me, and I am supposed to have it. What does that mean? And each of us decides what that means for us. And so we start finding ways to creatively explore life and find ways that are affirmative. Whatever we think is in our pathway, for one thing, we stop focusing on it. She tells us, because in this chapter, you learn to know that Spirit is giving to you. You look up, not necessarily in the physical sense, but if the physical sense helps remind you, then that's useful. But you look up in consciousness. You lift your consciousness, and that's what we're talking about. And know that you are receiving from that higher consciousness the seeds that are the idea of ways that you can have the good that you want. Now, the interesting thing about physically looking up is that I read at one point, that many psychologists have discovered that looking down is actually a trait that many people in their therapy circles do as a habit. They literally look down a lot. And so the psychologists have read something that made them believe that maybe we could change that pattern by having them look up. So they have their clients, and these are in these therapy sessions that are group sessions, and they teach them how to physically look up and have them look up and practice doing that before the next session. And the psychologists that did this in their groups, in their therapies, actually discovered that over time, many of the people that they worked with were able to achieve a level of peace, not depression, the opposite of depression, without medication. So they have used this in their therapy. And there is this idea that when we physically look up, it does something to that mind of thinking. And there is a biblical, an Old Testament scripture that says, I lift mine eyes unto the hills from which cometh my help. Well, the hills are not the mountains. The hills are the highest place, that highest place in consciousness. I lift my consciousness to the Most High, to that power, that presence, that God who gives me the good that I am supposed to have. So those are practical ways. There are ways that actually have worked for people. I have used this in workshops that I have done, and I actually made little tent plackets once upon a time that I passed out to my students, and they could put it in a place at home or wherever they wanted to, and it simply said, look up. And if nothing else, it was a reminder to stop plodding through life this way and to lift themselves up and lift their consciousness as they went. And so, one of the other ways that Emma talks about is that when we're in distress or pain, and it may be physical pain, but it may be emotional pain, this is where comes the foolish virgins. Because Spirit God does not lose sight of you. You don't lose your sight. You don't lose anything in this life. God is all that you need, whatever is going on, and the more you can focus on that and make that be your focus, the less distress that there is. Many metaphysicians have trained their mind to do this. And one of her sayings is, there is no power that can hurt me. There is no fear. And fear is something that drives us so very often. So we come to the idea of the foolish virgins. Now, Emma Curtis Hopkins was an incredibly well-educated woman. By the time she came to Christian Science, and that's how she began, she already knew the Bible extremely well. She knew the classics of the time, because we're talking about the later 19th century. And she knew many learned things about Eastern religions. She freely quotes from the Eastern religious books as well as from the classical works, including the Bible. So she certainly would have known the parables. Jesus' parables, and there's a couple of dozen of them, and the ones that are most well known are probably the prodigal son and perhaps the Good Samaritan. So the parable of the 10 virgins may not be as well known. And it's a simple story. It is that, and virgins, by the way, are not necessarily a sexual term. Virgins can be translated as maids, as young women. And indeed, it has been in some of the translations. But there was a party, there was a wedding, and there was going to be a great reception at the end of the wedding. However, The bridegroom had an emergency and had to leave, so the party was put on hold. So the 10, maybe bridesmaids that were there were waiting. They didn't know what time he would get back, but this was going to be a party and they were looking forward to it. 5 of the bridesmaids, the virgins, were prepared. At this time, in this place in which the Bible, this part of Jesus' life was happening, light in your lamp was very important. There were no lights to turn on. There were no flashlights. There was your lamp, and it had to have oil. And so 5 of the virgins made sure that they had plenty of oil for their lamp, and they were ready. So when the bridegroom sent word that he was on his way, they were ready. But the 5 foolish virgins were not. They had been, and I have read, gossiping and chatting and laughing and doing everything except the one thing they needed to do was to make sure that there was enough oil in their lamp. So then they race off to go find some oil, and by the time they got back, the door was locked to the party and they were not allowed in. So Emma thinks of these as the foolish virgins. Now, in the metaphysical sense, she says that a foolish virgin, a foolish person, is one who dwells on all of the things that are in their way, dwells on their troubles, describes it. She says describing evil is a foolish virgin. And she's saying not only that, she goes on to say that describing evil doubles it. Whatever it is, it becomes twice as much the more we tell it. How often have any of us had something happen to us that was surprising, perhaps? It may have been any number of diagnoses. It could be somebody who said or did something to us, someone who was very, very unpleasant to us, and we have to tell it and talk about it and build it and make it bigger. And she's saying that that is one of the ways that you block your good from coming to us. And it occurs to me, in this time where we are, we have the opportunity to choose what we want to look at. Raymond Charles Barker said in chapter 4 that your good and your bad, your evil, are just ends of the same stick. So if you're choosing to look at that end, if you're being a foolish virgin and talking and going on about what's wrong and how it can't do it and we can't stand this, you can change. All you have to do is change which end of the stick you put your attention on. And is it easy? Not always. But if you make the decision to do that, you not only can realize the good for you that you're supposed to have, but Raymond Charles Barker says you could be happy into the bargain. So where do I look? Where am I choosing to look? Can I be more aware of what I am looking at? I think that we can. Awareness is the key. It's to not go mindlessly chewing in my mind these things that I don't like, that, oh, I can't believe that person happened. What can I do and how am I going? And my mind is doing this, whether I speak a word or not, but it's in my mind and it has feeling behind it, and it's destructive. It's destructive to me. And I am the one that I have to focus on. And I have to know that the more I can look to the good end of that stick and figure out how to keep looking at the good end of that stick, that is how I make myself happier. That is how my good comes to me ever so much more readily. That is how I can live in this world in fullness, in plenty, in affluence, in health, wonderfully blissful health, and all of the good things that I desire. My good is here for me, and I'm supposed to have it. And I can know that I don't have to get in the way. Steadfastly facing thee, there are no obstacles in my pathway. There is good for me, and I'm supposed to have it. Thank you so much for joining us here today. It's really been a delight to talk about some of my favorite things, and so I'm very glad to have done this. So we come into a time where we're inviting you to share your prosperity with us, because we are a building and a church, and we are active, and we are doing things, and we appreciate the financial support that we're getting from everyone. And you're seeing ways that you can do that. And so I am inviting you with whatever gift, even if you've already sent it, or you're about to send it, or you did it with your phone, I invite you to think of your gift as being in your hands, and put your hands together and know with me, divine love consecrates my gift. It goes forth to heal, to bless, and to prosper all of those who give and all of those who receive. I rejoice in the sharing of my treasure, and I give my gift with love. And so it is. So, at many times in this point, this is where we close, and I am going to close in a way that I very often begin my day, and it is with a version of the Lord's Prayer that Emma Curtis Hopkins has used in her books, and it's been modified a little bit by one of my favorite teachers, Reverend Kathy Ann Lewis. And so it goes something like this. Father, Mother, God within me, holy is your name. Your kingdom is here now. Your will is done within me. Give me this day everything I need. Forgive my lack of confidence to command the law. Don't let me be tempted by appearances. Don't let me believe in evil. For you are the power and the glory within me forever. And so it is. Thank you again.